Hey, you guys, if someone could kindly raise their hand to just make sure my sound is working, then I will charge into this lecture. Oh, thank you guys. So this is exciting. Back in the day, and some of you may have been around long enough to remember this, I used to travel around and go to New York, Chicago, Denver, LA, San Francisco, and we would host these dinners. And we would just invite all the mentorship graduates to come out to dinner. I love that stuff. I have all the pictures of that still. So some of very, very fond memories of mine, getting to meet you guys, having a couple of drinks, some good food. And so anyways, this is as close as we're getting now in the virtual era, but we're going to do a lot of these, just so you know. This is the first series for mentorship graduates, but I want to reach out to you guys. So much has happened. Some of you may have taken this class a year ago. Some of you may have taken it 10 or 15 years ago. And I just want to update everybody on the latest things that are happening and what's gone on in my life, and what's happened in terms of Richard Lord and I working together, all the new content I've developed, and start to teach some of this stuff to you all. And super excited to be able to do this. So there's a series. This is a mentorship graduate series, which means I think there's 3 of these, and they're free. And I'm going to try to make them action packed and full of really good clinical information as best as I can, and focus, as always, on lab interpretation skills. That's kind of the goal. And then we will be doing more of these in the future too. So I guarantee you that. And we have a huge, tremendous sign up to this. So again, I feel like I'm hosting a dinner, and I wish I could. I wish I could reach out and hug you guys all and say hi to you all. And anyways, we're doing the best we can here with the virtual format. So I want to talk a little bit about, oh my shot. Let me just give you let me give you the updates first on the professional updates, just things that you guys should know. And some of this may slip by your email inbox and you may not be aware of it, but just a couple of updates on each of the lab companies that I've worked with all these years so you guys can stay fresh on that. And then I'll talk for a moment about Rupa, which is a service I'm using. Many of you probably know about, but haven't started to use them yet. And then I wanted to get into some clinical information on beta oxidation in particular, and maybe if we have time, a little bit on methylation and glutathione production and glycine. And then I asked, and many of you responded with some labs. So I want to go over um, some of the new labs, the metabolomics, the new organic acids from Diagnostic Solutions. And I want to thank all of you that sent in lab examples. Um, I didn't expect more than a couple, but we got like dozens and dozens of them. There's no way we can review them all, but I'm going to pick one of each, one from each company, so we can look at those. And thank you guys for sending them in. And I think that'll kind of round out the time. Okay, so that's what you are in for here. So let's start off just with a quick introduction to the lab companies, just so you can see what's happening out there. Doctors Data, one of the old companies since the 1970s, they've been around. They just released their HUMAP test. It's a hormone and urinary metabolites assessment profile. If you look at it carefully, you're going to be like, wait a minute, that looks a lot like a Dutch test, because it is exactly a Dutch test, except for it's done from liquid urine samples, not dried urine, which allows them some more flexibility in certain markers. And the presentation is completely different. So anyways, and it's about half the price of a Dutch test. And it's a trusted lab. I know Daryl Hickok really well, the man that has owned and run that lab for a long time. And they're doing good science over there. So this is a wonderful test. If you like to do the Dutch test and you want to save some money and have a different format, this is something you might think about. I've been using them in my practice and they're quite nice. And then the other update is, this is a big one, Tony Hoffman, a man on the move. I've known Tony for 30 years, and he started this lab called Diagnostic Solutions, and he's been running the GI map, which has become one of the most popular, maybe the most popular test in the industry. And so Tony went out on a spending spree a little while ago and bought all the brand new machines to do organic acids, or what they call small molecules. And so now, in addition to doing the GI map, he's offering this test called the omics and then an organic acids profile. So you can see here omics, organic metabolomics, and then organic acids profile. So this is pretty exciting. And it's the old crew from Richard Lord's lab days. He hired everybody that used to work with Richard. I love it. So it's the marketing people, the education people. It's like a reincarnation of what Dr. Lord did 30 years ago. So it's extra cool people, extra cool brand new equipment. The turnaround times are great. The pricing is good. and they're running organic acids in old school way with this new veneer of metabolomics and genomics kind of stacked on top of it. You couldn't ask for a better test. So Tony's a brilliant guy, and he's been running this lab. He's been running labs for as long as I've been around. And Jeff, who's his main salesperson, has been around for all the way back to the great Smokies days of like the 1980s. So these people really know what they're doing, and it's great. So they're offering organic acids and this omics test. And I think someone sent one of these in, so we're going to look at one of these tonight too, so you can see what those are like. And then there's Genova. Just a quick update on Genova. Jeff Ellis is running that company, and I work with him quite closely as well. And they have a cool thing that's come out. This is kind of a response to COVID. You guys know their NutrEval really well. Been around for, I don't know, decades. And a lot of people don't like to get their blood drawn, especially during COVID, but in general, sometimes you may just want to do a urine sample and get all the information that you need from a urine sample instead of getting into the complexity of the blood work. So I do a lot of blood work in my own practice, but this is a great alternative, and I'm using this frequently now. So the metabolomics test, it's like a NutrEval without the blood draw, basically. And it's a lot less expensive. They don't have to get the blood drawn. It's a lot more convenient. And another great new test, and this one's sort of taken off and becoming super popular too. Okay, and let's see. Oh, and then there's a sad note, which is that the ion panel test that was run in the lab outside of Atlanta that Genova has owned for a while, they shut all those machines down. Richard Lord is the scientist that set those machines up. I told him this a few months ago, and I thought he'd be really upset. And he was like, I'm gonna go, get in my kayak and get out on the lake. He really didn't care. So I guess there's new blood in the industry. It's a new time, and it was very sad for me. You can no longer order the original ion panels. They just don't exist anymore. Those machines have all been sent to a junkyard somewhere. So, anyways, this is the new stuff: metabolomics and omics. I think the most exciting thing about all this is that each one of these companies is dumping millions and millions of dollars into new equipment and new testing. And what that means is that our industry is growing and there's the financing to do this now. There have been more lab tests released in the last 18 months than I've seen in the last 18 years. And everybody's doing it. Doctors Data is releasing new tests. Tony at GI Map is doing new stuff. Genova is releasing new tests. So it's really exciting to see this. It's hard to let go of the old things. But the new technology is amazing. PCR for the stool, all these different omics, genomics, metabolomics things coming out. It's a super exciting time. Okay, so that's kind of my quick industry update for you all. And then on a more personal note, what I've been doing, for those of you that haven't been in the mentorship for a while, is the last 9, almost 10 years, I've been working with Richard Lord. And a day or two a week, he and I have been going at it. We have hundreds and hundreds of hours of things recorded at this point. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I was like, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to put this into a curriculum. And so I sat down, and it's really like basically the last 9 years of my life. First, working with Richard to understand what the heck he was saying. He and I rewrote his book together, my input, his writing. He wrote several new books under my, what would you call it? Not my duress, but my insistence, like we need a book on this, we need a book on that. And so we've got a lot of material that we've put together. And then I turned it into a curriculum. And this took a lot of time, and I'm very proud of it, and I want to share it with you guys. And I hope some of you will sign up for this, because this was a huge contribution in science that Richard has sort of gifted to us. And let me show you that. So it's the Advanced Curriculum for Mentorship Graduates, designed for graduates of the Mentorship Program, curated series of self-guided boot camps. I'll show you them in a minute to take your lab interpretation skills up to the Richard Lord level. Background and advanced detail on testing like amino acids, fatty acids, all the nutrient markers, much, much more advanced stuff on organic acids, long haul COVID, cardiometabolic. It's pretty broad. Everything's been pre-recorded. I've taught these classes live, so there are also included in the courses Q&A sessions that you can listen to. And we've taken off the time limitation. In other words, it used to be we would sell a class and like after a year it expired. There's so much content in here that I asked my staff to just leave it open-ended. So you'll have access to these classes for a while. I don't know how long I'm going to be alive, how long you're going to be alive, but there's a lot of content in here, and it's not like something you're going to get through in a year, most of you at least, okay? So you can go at your own pace. You can, if you get into it and you want to get the new curriculum, you can also sign up for the weekly live calls for $299 a month. And you can listen to, you can submit new labs every week if you really want to get super back into it. But if you want to get kind of lightweight back into it, just order the advanced curriculum and plow through it in the next couple of years. Okay, so here it is. First of all, the curriculum includes a section on functional genomics. So this is 100% what Richard's taught me. We had a student in class last week who's relatively new in the mentorship, maybe towards the end of her first year or something. And she nailed one of these genetic problems, figured it out. Child, I think it was like a 12-year-old kid, something like that. Thiamine deficiency based on these labs, genetic thiamine deficiency, loaded the kid up on thiamine and poof, kid's life is back. So this is pretty deep. It's the kind of advanced level of interpretation for organic acids. And I tried to lay out everything that Richard's taught me on how these SNPs work, how the enzymes work or don't work, and what you can do about them, and how you can interpret organic acids tests, amino acid tests, and fatty acid tests from a genomic perspective. So you can see genetically based fatty acid oxidation disorders, which I'm going to talk about in a minute because I see those a lot now. They know how to find them. And you can find, these genetic based extreme B vitamin deficiencies. And it's a little bit like MTHFR, but kind of taken in a more broad direction, I guess. Okay, so there's that class. And each one of these courses that I'm talking about now is part of this sort of second year curriculum or advanced curriculum. And each one of these has lectures that I've done and very extensive lectures that I recorded from Richard Lord. So you get to hear, I don't know, it's probably 10 or 12 hours of Richard in each one of these, okay? And each one of his lectures, that's an hour, it's gonna take you a few weeks to get through because they're very dense. Okay, so Richard and I on genomics, and then proteomics or amino acids and vitamins. It was such a huge class. I broke it into two parts. It's still massive. Even just one of these is going to take you a while to get through. Again, my lectures on the subject, a bunch of case studies, and then live Q&A calls that we've recorded from the past, and then segues into Richard's lectures, which are mind-numbing. I mean, when people listen to these, I mean, they're really, really sophisticated, but he's really understandable. It's a strange, if you haven't heard him lecture before, it's a very unique experience. And he is the scientist that created this whole industry. He's really the reason why we have amino acid and fatty acid and organic acids testing is because Richard thought about that in the 1960s. And so his perception and his analysis of this work is so profound, and I very urgently want to share it with you guys, okay? I also tried to price this ridiculously low, so it's not like a big financial decision. I think you can get this whole second year curriculum for $6,000, okay? And just for Richard's work alone in one or two of these classes is totally worth it. If you buy it, you'll see what I mean. Amino acids part 2, there's a whole section on cardiometabolic health, a lot on the fatty acids and how Dr. Lord looks at all that stuff, and then long haul syndrome. So long haul syndrome is a little bit more of my work and less of Richard's, but the rest of these courses are very solidly based in everything that Dr. Lord taught me in the last 9 years, okay? So I'm pretty excited about this. I didn't know that this moment would ever come, but it has, and now I'm releasing it. Really, it's the first time I've talked about this publicly, a whole second year curriculum with incredible content that you guys, if you're really into this stuff, it's just priceless, okay? And so we'll send out links tomorrow morning, I'm sure, to you all that have signed up for this so you can get the class. Let's just click on here and see what happens. I think you can pay in two payments. Yeah, so it's like $6,000 for the entire thing. You have access to it for as long as you want. You can pay for it all at one time, or you can make two separate payments, like $3,000 each, whatever. Okay, so that's basically been the last 9 years of my life right there, all right? And let's see, there's a whole bunch of questions that have come in already. Yeah, so now in terms of testing and like what do we really do, Juliana just asked this question. So because the ion is formally gone, you can still order them, but it's really a NutrEval, right? So you have 3 different options really. You can order the ion or a NutrEval. That's one good choice. You can order what I just showed you, the Diagnostic Solutions organic acids or their omics test, or you can order the metabolomics. Or if you're really into it, you can order Great Plains too. And I think at this point in human history, with all the new technology coming out, you really, I mean, the tests that are up and coming that are going to be supported and really grow, I would say are metabolomics slash NutrEval, and then the omics slash organic acids from Tony's lab, from Diagnostic Solutions. And for most practitioners, I think it's easier just to pick a lane and go with one of those companies. And so if you're more partial to Genova, do the metabolomics. If you're more partial to the GI map company, do their organic acids or their omics test. I think it's much easier to get one interpretation down because the formatting and how these labs are presented is really confusing. And if you're switching lab companies all the time, it can be kind of mind-numbing. And I'm going to show you what I'm doing in my new curriculum now. And this is partially based on anger and frustration and being pissed off that all these lab companies have such different formats. And how pissed off can you be? I mean, I've been looking at ion panels and the organics with an X for 30 years, and now it's effectively gone. And that hit me hard. Like I said, Richard was like, whatever, it was his test, but I was like pissed about the thing. Like, what? You guys can't take that away. So what I'm realizing now is that I got to grow up and deal with life on a regular basis here and not be a whiny, complainy kind of person. And so what I'm doing now with all my teaching and all my conceptual understanding is just teaching pathways and not lab tests. So like after 30 years of teaching to the lab tests, now I'm rechanging all the curriculum, including the mentorship curriculum this year, so that it's all just about pathways. And if you learn the pathways, it doesn't matter what company you use. If you see how pyruvate works in relation to lactic acid and all that stuff, then it doesn't matter. So I want me, and probably you guys too, to become kind of lab report free, because you really understand the pathways so much you can glance at any of these tests and figure it out. Okay, that's kind of my goal now. And I think we should be free of the lab report as being like the controlling item for structure, okay, for our structure and our understanding. So anyways, I think what's left now in terms of ordering either a NutrEval or metabolomics from Genova, or an omics or organic acids from Diagnostic Solutions. Those are probably your best options. And if you know how to understand, this is Lynn's question, if you know how to read beyond the reference ranges, then you can look at the functional genomics on any of these tests. In fact, there's a book here. Oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to share this book with people, but I'm going to do it anyways. Sorry, I just can't help myself. Is my camera running? I hope my camera's on. If not, you're not going to be able to see this. So don't buy this book, okay? Wasn't that Abby Hoffman who said that? One of my best friends, Lauren, his dad just died, which is kind of sad. But Marty Glass was a hardcore radical communist back in the 60s. Anyways, this just makes me think of Marty. Don't buy this book. But don't buy this book, Inherited Metabolic Disease in Adults. So this book gives you the detailed background on all the functional genomic stuff that you can discover on organic acids, fatty acids, and amino acids. And that is, to me, the most exciting thing in our industry. However, in trying to teach this work, I found that for most people, it's just way too much bandwidth and there's no need for that level of complexity. Okay, so if you want to keep it simple, just do the metabolomics from Genova or the organic acids from Diagnostic Solutions. If you want to make your life complex, then either do the NutrEvals from Genova or the omics from Diagnostic Solutions. And let's get into it and look at some labs here so you can see what the heck I'm talking about. And let's see. Oh, here's the first one. So this is Diagnostic Solutions. Hillary sent it in. I think I see Hillary there. Let me grab Hillary. Hillary, could you give us like a 1-minute summary on this patient so we can look at the lab and kind of introduce everybody to it?
Sure. I'm not sure. I sent in 2 labs. Can you tell me the first initial that was on that one? You know,
It
I
says
filled in
female. Ooh, I don't see a
on the
female. Let's
questionnaire. Okay.
see. I don't see it here, but let me pull it up here. Does that ring a bell if you look at this?
Yeah, I think I know who that is. So she is 43 years old, wants to lose weight, gain motivation and energy. In her 20s, she had a lot of spells of falling asleep randomly, and then she would wake up in a dead sweat in the middle of the night. She has suffered a concussion from falling off a horse, postpartum preeclampsia, has chunks of hair falling out, has had 2 miscarriages, currently has blood in her stool. I just know because I ran a GI map, and a lot of opportunistic bacteria and H. pylori.
And does she struggle with losing weight? Did you just say that?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I definitely believe in a higher power, you know. I was about to write a check this afternoon to somebody and it was like 11:59. I've never spoken to this person. They didn't have my phone number. And I was about to write this check and send it like in the wrong way to the wrong person. And that person randomly called me at that moment, like as if there was some psychic vibe that they knew that I was going to do this. And in fact, you know, in terms of psychic vibes here, this is exactly what I wanted to talk about right now, okay? Which is this section here being totally screwed up. Fatty acid oxidation, you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Can we just focus on the beta oxidation part of her problem? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, it's awful.
Okay, all right, yeah. So this is perfect. I couldn't have, you know, I mean, if I had tried to spend an hour looking for labs that would represent this, I wouldn't have come up with one this perfect. Okay, so let's take a look. And then I'll go through a couple of these tests and then we'll have time for questions at the end if I don't get to your question right now. So this is, again, it's Diagnostic Solutions. It's their newer test, you know, to replace organics from Genova. We're looking at the fatty acid oxidation portion of the test. In someone with the history that Hillary just said, not such a great history, what hair loss, weight gain,
Mm-hmm.
waking up in the middle of the night.
With sweating, waking up in the middle of the night. Yeah.
Does she
Concussion.
seem to have blood sugar related problems, but it's not really blood sugar related problems?
Right.
Is that
Right.
true?
It's adrenal.
So what happens? What happens in relation to blood sugar to her?
Her blood sugar doesn't seem to, and she's a pretty good eater. That's the other thing. So that's why this makes so much sense. She's not eating a lot of junk. She's not drinking Pepsi and eating pizza at all. She's
Okay.
trying to do the right thing, but she's got multiple infections in her gut and some real adrenal dysfunction as well. Her HPA axis is really off.
Okay. All right. So this is perfect. So again, this is a book you're not going to buy, right? Inherited metabolic diseases in adults. There's a whole section. There's a whole chapters on this problem in there. Okay. All right. So let's just dig in and look. So we can look at this at a couple of different levels. Like you can look at this as, let me show you the slides. You can look at this at the like deep divey, deep into the pool, however you want to say it, kind of extraordinarily complex way of looking at it. Or you can look at it in a super simple way. So let's start with beta oxidation to begin with here. Here we go, beta oxidation. All right. So the number one fuel source for the human body when we're at rest, 80, 90+% of the energy for your heart, your whole body is coming from the burning of fat, right? And that process is called beta oxidation. So we take these fatty acids and we put them into the mitochondria and then we break them down and we make energy out of them. And again, this is the main fuel supply. And you can see as a byproduct of that whole process, all these things are flying off here. Methylsuccinic acid, ethylmalonic acid, or ethylmalonate, subraric acid or subarate, adipic acid or adipate. They have different names depending what lab company you're using. But the idea being that this whole process of the stripping down of fats to make energy is completely dependent on the fatty acids getting into this mitochondria and then your body's ability to transport them around and break them down. Okay, and if you look here on this diagram, this is an old one you guys are probably familiar with. Here's the fatty acids coming in And they're supposed to go this way over through the carnitine shuttle into the mitochondria. Okay. And this process is greatly disturbed in long haul COVID. It's greatly disturbed, obviously, in people with cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, all that kind of stuff. It's greatly disturbed in people that have chronic fatigue. It's greatly disturbed in anybody who has any kind of mitochondrial problem. Interestingly, there's also this intestinal bacterial connection, right? And this is just what Hillary said a few seconds ago. When the intestinal bacteria are working properly, they make fat. Your intestinal bacteria take fiber and they turn it into fat. And they turn it into fats like butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid. And that butyrate is grabbed by the carnitine shuttle and goes into the mitochondria where you make energy out of it. Isn't that crazy? That's coming from your gut bacteria. Your gut bacteria feed butyrate to your mitochondria so you can make energy. And if that's not working really well, ethylmalonic acid or ethylmalonate goes up. So these are the markers, right? High ethylmalonic acid or ethylmalonate means that this whole butyrate energy production thing screwed up. Adipic acid or adipate or subaric acid or subarate going high means that the fatty acids are not going this way. They're getting broken down in a different way, which is bad. It's bad for everybody. It means your mitochondria are not working properly. And that's what's happening in this person. Now, if you cut back for a second after seeing all these names here, and you look at the lab, there's your adipate or adipic acid, there's your subaric acid or subarate. Down at the bottom here, you got your ethylmalonic acid or ethylmalonate, and there's all these other intermediaries in there. And every single one of them, except for this guy, well, two of them. One is actually undetectable and one is moderately high, but basically the entire pattern going high shows that fatty acids are being blocked from going into the mitochondria. Okay. And now, if you want to blow that up a little bit more and get a little bit more into the weeds here, which Richard made this slide for me. If I complain enough to Dr. Richard Lord, he ends up coming back, writing a new book or a new chapter, or he makes up a slide. So clearly I didn't understand this process really well because he's like, Dan, I've got a new slide for you. I love, this is like my favorite slide of all time. I hope somebody else likes it besides me because this is like so cool to me. Okay, so let's kind of go on a little journey here. And this is not an abstract, weird thing that you're just memorizing because you have an exam or something. This is actually clinically relevant. Once you understand this process, you'll be able to help a lot of people, like Hillary is about to help this woman. We take fatty acids, palmitic acid or palmitate is the main one, and that's out there in the cytosol. And fortunately, fats can't just get into your mitochondria on their own. They are blocked by these barriers, right? These twin membranes, the outer and the inner mitochondrial membrane are also made of fat. And so the fats are repelled. They can't just sneak across here. If fats could sneak across your mitochondrial membranes, I have a personal theory that every time we ate ice cream, we'd probably just have a heart attack and die, right? It's a good thing. Your body's regulating this and keeping the fat out until it needs it. And so your body takes palmitic acid or palmitate and it converts it into this other thing because the palmitic acid is just structurally too large a molecule to get across the membrane. So it breaks it down and it crams a carnitine on there. And because the carnitine's tiny, tiny, whoosh, it sneaks through this membrane, gets through this protein translocase thing there, and all of a sudden it's in the mitochondria. Then the carnitine unlatches, carnitine goes back out here, grabs another fatty acid, and the fat reconstitutes itself here, and then you break it down for energy. So the only way you can get fatty acids of this size across the membrane is with carnitine. And so because it's a complex mechanism, it's very prone to genetic defects, right? Because you could have a problem with this enzyme not being constructed properly. You could have a problem with this enzyme. You could have a problem with this enzyme. There's so many little stupid steps in here that any one of them is prone to having a SNP. And so you see this a lot because it's a complex process, so it can break down in a lot of different ways. This isn't funny, but it's kind of funny. We were, this just happened a couple days ago. We were driving on the freeway, and I had just read that, and I didn't know this. I think it's true that Teslas are like the number third rated car for poor performance in terms of breaking down. And right as I was saying that to the kids, we drove by this Tesla that was pulled over on the freeway and was stuck, you know, in the on the side of the road. It was just kind of funny. But anyways, the more complex the thing is, the more likely it is to have a problem. I don't know about Teslas, but they seem pretty complicated, right? This process here is so complex, it breaks down a lot. And what happens though when it breaks down is it feels like a blood sugar handling problem. Because when you don't eat and you haven't eaten for a while, the longer that you haven't eaten, the less that your body's depending on glucose and the more that you're depending on fats or fatty acids. So when you're in a fasted state, like at night when you're sleeping, when this woman had problems, right? Or when you just haven't eaten for a few hours and a lot of the glucose is just sort of drained out of your bloodstream, your body then goes into 80 to 90% of energy production coming from this process of beta oxidation. And so the last one of these patients I had, everything that she was complaining about seemed like a blood sugar problem, but everything she did to regulate her blood sugar didn't help at all. She was super clean with her food. It's just like Hillary's patient. But she had, let me see, I have a slide on this. Wait for it. They have names for these things, right? She had a long chain fatty acid disorder, LCFAD is what they call it. Okay, and there's actually whole websites about this. There's people who research this and spend their whole careers studying this. Um, and you can see it in real time on these tests. And I'm not going to get into the complexity of it, but this person for sure has some genetic version on it because every one of those enzymes except for one of them was screwed up, right? So this is not just a I didn't eat enough carnitine today kind of problem, right? This has probably been going on this person's whole life. So in this person, the carnitine shuttle is broken. And so this whole long chain fatty acid beta oxidation thing is not working. So then what's going to happen to energy production in a citric acid cycle? It's not going to work very well. Okay, and the longer that she goes without eating, and the more dependent she becomes on fat burning, the worse she's going to get. All right, so let's see. Now, solutions-wise, because we always want to know about solutions, there's two things, and sometimes the dosages need to get quite high to make this happen. So obviously carnitine, and you don't have to buy the expensive kind you can, but you can just get regular old L-carnitine. I get the stuff from Pure Encapsulations. We can buy it from anybody. Let's say you get like a 500 milligram capsule and you want to load them up on 2,500 a day. So let's say 3 in the morning and 2 at night. That would work. Okay, that's 2,500 a day total. And then you have to have riboflavin or vitamin B2. So you might get the riboflavin or B2 from a B complex. That would be legit. You could, if it's a more severe problem, you might need to add in some extra riboflavin by itself. I'd probably start with the B complex and see, and if not, then you can get riboflavin in a 400 milligram capsule. Several companies sell that, and you can give that either once or twice a day. All right, so that's the quick fix to get the fat so they can start to burn. You should see a response within a matter of days or weeks. This should be life-changing if you're doing this with the right person. And it shouldn't be this subtle, I feel a little bit better. It should be like pretty dramatic. And then there's one other thing that you want to think about. And conceptually, let me just show you on the lab first. So now we're looking at this poor person's Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle, and it doesn't look very good either. You can see how, again, every one of the markers except for one is elevated. So these enzymes are not working properly, even a little bit. In fact, the citric acid or citrate marker is almost at 3,000. Okay, and the reference range cutoff is 300. That's 10 times the reference range almost. Okay, that's a pretty serious problem. So when you get into values that are double or more at the high end of the reference range, then what are you thinking about? You're thinking about this, inherited metabolic diseases in adults. Okay, because you get into statistical territory with some of these numbers where it's not even possible. There's no way you could eat so poorly or be so deficient in a nutrient that could happen. There has to be a SNP or a genetic factor involved, like this person has. So now, just want to think ahead a little bit though, because we want to get her beta oxidation working, and this is another concept I want to work with in general, is that if you do one thing, what's going to happen to the other thing? So if you're going to improve her beta oxidation, you're by definition going to be asking her Krebs cycle to work a lot harder, and it's not working very well already. So if we just give her the carnitine and B2 and maybe some magnesium or whatever, you're still going to have a bottleneck because you're going to crank up the fat burning, and then all the electrons are going to hit this mess, and they're not going to get processed, right? And so energy production is not going to flow. Sorry, but one more car story, and then I'll stop with car stories. So my son bought a 1992 Volvo, which I fully endorsed, and I think it's a cool car. He got it because he watches the TV show Luther, and he thinks Luther's really cool. If you haven't seen Luther, you got to watch that show. It's really great. Anyways, Luther drives around in an old Volvo. And so when we first bought the car about a year ago, I like to change shock absorbers. So we changed the shocks in the back because they were 30 years old. And within like a week or two of changing the shocks, the entire front end of the car, all the suspension in the front end, all the bushings broke. And so now when he went to, we were driving around the other day in the car, I hadn't been in it in a while, and it's like every time you turn. So lesson learned, right? We fixed the rear end of the suspension, and that made it stiffer and work better. And then the whole front end collapsed. Now it needs to be fixed too. Same here, okay? If you fix beta oxidation and you don't fix the Krebs cycle, you're going to make the Krebs cycle even worse. So you have to anticipate, like with my car example, I should have thought ahead and thought, well, the suspension in the front is 30 years old too. We can't just fix the rear end and then think that the front's going to work. So you can't just fix beta oxidation and figure the whole problem's going to go away, because this system is going to take an increased load now. The Krebs cycle is going to be burdened even more. So you got to crank up CoQ10 and magnesium levels, along with the B vitamins that you're already going to give, and maybe some amino acids, so that you get the complete re-engagement of this whole system. Beta oxidation is working now. You got all these electrons coming into the Krebs cycle. You got the nutrients you need to make that work. And let me show you some diagrams on that. Let's see. There's a kind of easy one and then a really complicated one. I don't know which ones you guys would prefer, but that's the complicated one, but I think it's kind of cool. Maybe that's a little overkill. I don't know. We can go simple if you want. Okay, so what we're saying here is that if we're going to make this whole part of the system work better, fats, and this is shut down, then we better put a lot of energy into making the citric acid cycle work better, because there's about to be a huge amount of energy hitting it. Okay, so you do the carnitine and B2, and then to crank this up, you make sure you get the CoQ10, magnesium, and amino acids going. See all these amino acids out here? These are the green boxes are all amino acids. They're all coming into the citric acid cycle, so they help a lot. So low dosages of free-form amino acids, CoQ10, magnesium will round out the whole picture. So if we go back to like a program design kind of thing, and why are we doing that? Well, for number one, the citric acid cycle was already screwed up on the lab. But number two, we're going to make it work even harder. So we're going to load up on CoQ10. I like the CoQ-null because it's 200 milligrams of ubiquinol per pill. That's the strongest form of, this is from Designs for Health. That's a strongest form of CoQ10 you can get, and it's 200 milligrams in a single pill, so that's kind of cool. So you can give like at least 400 a day of that stuff. That'll make something happen. And then some kind of magnesium glycinate maybe, or some other kind of magnesium if you prefer. So make sure they get plenty of magnesium in their system. And then, free-form amino acids. Those are always in a powder. I've been using Amino Replete lately because I like that one. That's from Pure, but several companies have them. And the dose that's appropriate for this use is going to be 1 teaspoon 2 times a day. And be careful on that one, because sometimes the products come with a scooper, and sometimes the scooper is like 5, 10, 12 grams. So you always got to tell people, throw the scooper away, 1 teaspoon twice a day. Don't use the scooper because they could overdose really easily if you don't warn about that. Okay, so this would be a beta oxidation program that's at the top here, and then a citric acid cycle program to complement it, and just run them both all at the same time with a multi-pack. You got it made, okay? All right, so now, where are we at in time? Oh, we're in a pretty good place on time here. So let me see. Let me just look at questions real quick that have already come in. Yeah, so I'm not, so for JE, I'm just using either the NutrEvals or or I'm sorry, either the NutrEvals or metabolomics or the ones from Diagnostic Solutions from Tony's lab. I'm not doing the old ion panels that got changed to the new thing. I don't know why it seems a little weird to do that. Let's see. And let's grab, I think we got most of these. Daniel asked a question. I'm going to come back to him in a second because we got a case of his too. Yeah, so the reason why I made, this is Jasmine's question here. The reason why I made, let me find it here. The reason why I made this thing here, the advanced curriculum, it's kind of open-ended as to when we're going to shut you down. So like if you buy it, you can have it for as many years as you want. The reason for that is because Richard's lectures are so dense. You're going to want to listen to, like each one of these has like 10 or 12 hours. So you're going to listen to his genomic stuff. And then you're going to think, oh, I didn't understand any of that. And then a few months later, hopefully you're going to come back and listen to it again. Okay. And then there's 5 sets of that. Just his glutathione lecture alone, when you listen to his methylation and glutathione lecture, you're just going to be crying or screaming or laughing, or you're going to go out and you're going to buy a bottle of vodka and drink the whole thing. It's just so intense. And you're going to be like, I didn't know that's how methylation works. It brings together so many clinical variables. So I want you guys to savor his work and be able to go back to it and listen to it over and over again. I've been having the same conversations with him for 9 years, and it's just starting to sink in. This is complex stuff. But every single word of every single one of his lectures in these classes is clinically relevant. So I went through hundreds and hundreds of hours of tapes that he and I had made, and I pulled out the ones that I know clinicians need to hear. So this is heavily curated. I spent a long time doing that because I want you to hear Richard at his best, and I don't want you to waste your time. I want you to just get clinically actionable stuff, but it's scientific intense. It's intense on the science part. Okay, so you have to listen to it more than once. There's no way you're going to understand it the first time. And then he's got a whole book. He's got a 1,200-page book that goes through all this too. You can buy his book if you want. It's a couple $100 for the book. All right, so that was Jasmine's question. Let's see. That is only, so the don't expire thing is only true of this advanced curriculum. Our other stuff expires after a year. That's typically the classes are gone after a year. A Vibrant Health is really popular right now. I don't use them very much, but it's becoming kind of one of the up and coming labs. Yeah, you ideally want to be in the 3rd quintile. When the 4th quintile on these markers starts to get a little crazy, okay? If there were glutathione problems here, would you treat that at the same time? If there are glutathione problems, that needs to be part of the mitochondrial treatment. All right, let's grab Daniel. Daniel, are you there? Or Dan? See, I got you unmuted on my side. Oh yeah, there you are. You're
All right.
unmuted.
Hey, Dan, how's it going?
Hey, good. Maybe you could give us a brief rundown on this case that you sent in. And this is, again, obviously a Genova test.
Yeah, I continued to run the organics test from, out of your suggestion with Genova. And essentially this
By the way,
patient,
it's the exact same stuff. It's just a different graphics presentation.
yeah,
So it doesn't really matter which one you run. They're running the samples on the same machines. They're generating the same data. They're just putting it into a different graphic format. That's the only difference now, because the old machines were shut down. So there's no more real organics profile. It's a NutrEval that they've reformatted.
okay.
Yeah, so it's not a
Now,
problem. It's just whatever format you prefer, to be honest.
now is it the metabolomics has more stuff on it?
It's a little different, but not much. And I would say they're almost exactly interchangeable. So if you like this one, I would just stick with it.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I saw the difference in cost was about $20, so it's really no big deal to
Okay.
run either. Okay. Essentially, this patient gained a lot of weight recently, definitely fatigued, has a history of co-infections, including Lyme and Bartonella, and also on his GI panel, very low Sig-A. Let's see what else. There's and then more currently a lot of GI disturbance more recently. So I
It
mean,
looks like a pretty bad yeast overgrowth, right? On the
yeah,
so
exactly.
that's a big one. So yeast and fungal problem. And this is confusing to patients, because sometimes the stool testing misses it because the samples by the time they get to the lab usually don't have any viable yeast left. So you're going to pick up a lot of yeast overgrowth on organic acids testing that will not show up on the stool testing. And you always have to explain that to patients, otherwise they get confused too.
Right, and that was the case.
Was it? Okay, yeah. And
Yep.
then what is it? So top complaints are weight gain and what else?
Fatigue.
Fatigue.
Um, Also, there's an underlying thyroid antibodies have gone well elevated as well too. So,
So this
but
looks like, from all these that I've seen recently, this looks like a pretty extreme version of a gut problem because you've got almost this entire section without even looking at the GI test. Almost every single one of these markers is elevated. You don't see that often.
right,
So, this is like an old-fashioned, maybe primarily gut-related problem. The interesting thing to me really is that a lot of these markers are fine. Like the B vitamin markers are fine. Most of the metabolic markers are fine. So does this person eat really well, or do they exercise a lot, or do they got something going that's
eat
healthy
really
for them?
well. Like I said, the infections have always sort of been there.
But they have a
Uh,
clean diet?
yeah, clean
Okay.
diet. The other thing was you were talking about carnitine. The subearic acid was
Yes,
really,
that was quite high.
yeah,
And then the environmental toxin markers also.
right,
So they're glutathione deficient with a lot of environmental toxins, a lot of fat tissue, a pretty screwed up gut. Surprisingly, not that much as you would think going on with the neurotransmitter markers, and not as much as you would think going on with carb metabolism. There's a few little things here, but it's not as bad as you would think. So that may be, usually that means there's some lifestyle factor that they're doing really well, which it sounds like maybe is diet. But yeah, they have
yeah,
a version of what we just saw, not as bad, but they have a version of the beta oxidation problem, like maybe a milder version of that, and they're quite toxic with a screwed up gut. So that's
right,
kind of, it's not easy, but let's see here. Um, yeah. And again, what's interesting is glutathione markers are okay. 8-OHDG, the oxidative stress marker is not bad at all. CoQ10 is okay. So obviously, like I said, they're doing something to take care of themselves because there's a lot of antioxidants coming into their system somehow. Given the toxin levels being high, you think that these things would be, more problematic. So they would be more like a clean out the gut extremely well, get all the yeast and fungal overgrowth out, and that's maybe a 4 or 6 month project. And somewhere along the way, then to do, the complete like phase 1, phase 2 liver detox clearing. It's probably already what you had in mind, but
right. Yeah,
do you have any
yeah.
questions about that? Any specific questions I could help with, or is that?
No, just your basic dysbiosis, rebuild, GI revive.
And just based on how extreme the sections are, I'd say this is primarily a gut case with an overlay of toxins and a decent lifestyle. So you're probably going to spend most of your time, 4 months, 6 months, maybe longer, getting all that yeast and fungal stuff out because it looks like it's pretty deeply embedded. And then you want to support the liver as much as you need to in order to get that project done. And then when the gut's in better shape, you retest maybe 6, 8 months from now, see the gut's in better shape, then you could more aggressively go after the liver support part. But it's probably going to be hung up. You'll probably be hung up 4 to 6 months just getting rid of the yeast, would be my guess.
Any new wrinkles that
No, this one is
you
really
showing up?
super straightforward. This is kind of the
Okay,
opposite of what we just saw. Yeah, I think this is like
okay.
more like pretty simple. Yep.
You're okay. Classic GI.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Dan. All right, and we have one more here. Vidya, is Vidya here? And I'm trying to represent all the different lab companies. This is a Great Plains test. Let's see. I have to scroll down, and I don't see video. Well, that's a bummer. Okay, well, probably most of the people that signed up are going to listen to the recording. So let me go through this anyhow. So we don't know exactly what's wrong with this person because we don't have video on the line to tell us, but let's just look at the lab and see what stands out. So right off the bat, like we just saw with the last case, D-arabinitol or arabinose is high, so we have a yeast or fungal problem. And hippuric acid is high. Oh, and DHPPA is high, quite high. Okay, so there's again a big dysbiotic kind of yeast fungal overgrowth problem happening here. But I'm kind of curious about the mitochondrial markers. Let's look at those and see what kind of pattern that you find. Nothing remarkable, right? But down here, under neurotransmitters, now we have something to sink our teeth into. Homovanillinic is high. The ratios are off. So we're often running with a neurotransmitter problem. So mitochondria, not bad. Major yeast or fungal overgrowth. And then a pretty big problem with dopamine. And this is something you guys probably already know, but I'll just review it anyways. Probably my favorite subject to correct of all time is the favorite thing to correct of all time, I would say, is dopamine. Why do you say that, Dan? Well, because for the amount of time and energy you put into correcting dopamine, the benefit to the patient is just massive. And it's not that hard to do if you know what you're doing. And I'm going to show you some different slides that I didn't really prepare for today, but I just want you to see these because they're important. And I think they'll depict what we're going to talk about better. So, you know, I spent 12 years working with Dr. Marty Hinz, looking at neurotransmitter tests. 12 years, that's a long time. Every Wednesday for 12 years with Marty Hinz. And he's a genius, literally a genius, and taught me a lot. And at the time I worked with him, which was a while ago, he had 3 million days of patient data. So it wasn't like we were chit-chatting. It was like, Dan, this is what we discovered this week. What's going on with your patients? And I tested thousands of people doing these neurotransmitter tests, you know. And so I'm trying to translate that over all that information because organic acids is a little slippery. Let me show you why. But we don't want to ignore by any means the ramifications of people that have screwed up dopamine because you can help them a lot. So let's just look at the classic representation of this here first. And then I can explain, I think, a little more detail what I learned from all those years of working with Marty. Okay, so here, and this is, you know, obvious, just a quick review because you guys already know this, I'm pretty sure. So you take phenylalanine, you make tyrosine from it, you make L-dopa, and then you make dopamine. And when this gets screwed up, homovanillate or homovanillinic acid is going to go either up or down. So you're measuring the metabolite of dopamine, and then you're inferring from that what's going on with dopamine. In this particular case, the homovanillate is high, so that may mean they're overproducing it or they're not breaking it down very well. So you can have a COMT problem. There's enzyme issues, right? Because you're not breaking it down. Could be that they're stressed out of their mind, so they're just making tons and tons of it. And it kind of matters and it kind of doesn't matter because of what I'm about to share. If you're going to use tyrosine, well, you might be thinking, well, why would I use tyrosine? There's already too much homovanillate. But what if they're in a stress response, just like with cortisol, and the cortisols are high, we can still use pregnenolone to great effect. So when homovanillate goes high, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to avoid tyrosine, okay? And let me try to show you why. Here. This is a little complicated, but it's worth learning about. So here. This is really important. So I don't know, I think this slide's the easiest one to see. what I'm talking about. So here's dopamine, and dopamine flows into these transporters and into cells based on what's happening with this gate here. Okay, these are called OCT2 gates or transporters. They're reuptake ports. Also, they're known as reuptake ports. So when some patient says I'm on an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, what they're talking about is they're inhibiting this OCT2 transporter. So if you're taking a Prozac or something like that, then this gate here is swung shut. It's forced to shut. And that blocks serotonin from going back into the cell, so it stays outside the cells where it's more biologically active. That's the mechanism of action of all the antidepressants. If you do a huge line of cocaine, you're going to get a massive block of the dopamine gate. So there's going to be a huge rush of dopamine. Or if you do speed, or if you take a drug that works on norepinephrine or epinephrine, it'll do the same thing, right? When the medications, recreational drugs, things that people do to get high, or things that people are taking to try to not be depressed or not be anxious, they block these gates. Okay, where it gets a little tricky, and this is why if you understand this, then it's much easier to work with people based on organic acids, is that when you give tyrosine and you boost the dopamine in that patient, that's going to force the dopamine gate to swing open and dopamine is going to flow, which is what you want, right? You want it to move around and to do things to relieve the suffering of this person. However, everything that you do to move the dopamine gate is going to move the serotonin gate. So every time you treat somebody with tyrosine, you're manipulating their serotonin as much as you're manipulating their dopamine. Go figure, you know? That's complicated, and you can get into the physiology behind this if you really want. Someday I want to teach a whole class just on this, like a couple-month class just on how this works, because it's kind of cool. But the short version of it is, if you take tyrosine, you're going to immediately change that person's serotonin levels as well as their dopamine levels. So a lot of the time, you have a test like this that shows a problem with a dopamine marker. If you give tyrosine, it's not just going to impact dopamine, it's going to immediately impact serotonin, oftentimes in a very, very positive, good way. Okay, it's not a bad thing that this happens. And this is one of the reasons why we probably talked about this in the mentorship. If you remember, that you want to typically use a little 5-HTP with your tyrosine, because you're going to be changing serotonin flows quite dramatically when you use tyrosine. So in a case like this, even though you're just seeing on the organic acids that, let me go back up there. Even though you're only seeing the dopamine marker, right, homovanillinic acid is quite high, you're only seeing that one marker out of range. And let's see, where's the, here's the 5-HIAA. The serotonin marker is okay. But these chemicals, serotonin and dopamine, are paired together. So as soon as you start to work on this, you're going to have an impact on this. And it's just kind of the way your body works. So anyways, for that particular patient, usually we would start with tyrosine in a 500 milligram capsule and give that 2-3 times a day. Give it a week or two, and then if that's not enough, you can either use Dopa Boost from Designs for Health or Dopa Plus from Pure to give an extra boost to the dopamine. Remembering that you're going to be affecting serotonin too, and if this program's working really well and the person's got a lot of relief of their depression or anxiety, whatever's bothering them, then you're going to want to add in some 5-HTP. You don't have to add in a lot. Maybe you just give them like 100 milligrams at dinner or something like that, one capsule, or you can do more, but at least something like that. Okay, and you can fix this entire system in a really kind of integrated way, which is wonderful. All right, so now let's see if there's more questions. We're going to go over just by a few minutes, and I'll wrap up in one sec. Let's see. Yes, and it works in the reverse. If you use tryptophan or 5-HTP, it has an immediate impact on dopamine, believe it or not. But if you're thinking about using either of them, and that's something I learned from Hins, it's much more, this is super important. You should write this down somewhere because this will save you a lot of hassles. It's much more likely that adjusting dopamine with tyrosine or mucuna is going to fix serotonin than the opposite. And I like literally did this a couple thousand times with patients. I'm not kidding. We used to do neurotransmitter testing every week. You give the test, you give the patient like 6 test kits. You're like, you're going to do this urine test every week. How many, Dr. Kalish? 6 of them, 10 of them. I don't know. Just get them, test, test. Every week we were testing people. I did this over and over again, thousands of times. And what I found was that the vast majority of people that had both serotonin and dopamine problems responded to tyrosine and mucuna far more quickly and more in a more helpful and elegant way than if I just used the 5-HTP by itself. Okay, so even if their problem is primarily serotonin based, you can often fix it with a dopamine correction. Dopamine has more regulatory control over the system. You can read about that if you want. There's this thing called DARP32 that explains that. But okay, and if they're on a prescription medication, antidepressant, then you don't want to do what I'm talking about. If they're on a prescription medication, you want to give balanced and small amounts of amino acids. Okay. And if they're having any kind of reaction to the tyrosine, for sure you want to cut the dose in half and see how you're doing. And I use tyrosine as from Designs for Health or Pure. They're identical pretty much. If 5-HIAA is high, so Sonal's question, if 5-HIAA is high, then I would adjust this program, and I would probably bring the 5-HTP up a little higher, something like that. So let me kind of reverse and say, because I don't think I said it very accurately. If there's a problem with both serotonin and dopamine, just start with the dopamine part of the program, because that's more likely to correct both. If you're a week or two into it and it's not working, add in a dopa boost. If you're a week or two into that and it's not working again, then you can add in the 5-HTP. If they primarily have a serotonin problem, you can just start with 5-HTP and see how they respond to that, okay? Because you can do it from either way. But if they have an equally yoked problem, the dopamine seems to have more regulatory control. And I would say it's like 8 out of 10 times the dopamine worked better than the serotonin if I was trying to decide which one, because they had both problems. Now, if they only have the serotonin markers positive, start with that, serotonin treatment, okay? Let's see here. I don't want to confuse you guys. And there's one other thing I have to tell you. Hang on a second. Let me pull it up here. We've got another one of these coming up. That's the wrong thing. Here it is. I told you about the bundle thing you can do. Oh, I'm supposed to remind you about Rupa. If you're not using Rupa, just deal with it. Get a Rupa account. Everybody's using Rupa now. You can order all your labs through Rupa. It's super efficient. I can't believe I was doing my labs for so long. And you get $100 off your first order if you tell them that I sent you over there. Okay, I'm a strong proponent of or supporter of Rupa. Proponent, maybe that's the right word. I don't know. A strong supporter of Rupa because they have saved me so much money. They have a really good operation. They do all the labs. They take all the admin off your plate. Okay, so if you haven't checked them out yet, if you're living under some kind of a rock, go to rupa.com or rupahealth.com and sign up for an account. You get $100 off for that. And then we have another one of these coming up on the 16th of March. We're going to get into my next favorite subject after beta oxidation, which is mitochondrial treatments using free-form amino acids. So again, if you have some labs to send in, I'll pick a couple of them that are representative of the different lab companies, and hopefully that maybe show some of the patterns that I want to talk about for the class. So it's great. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to all the labs, but who knows what we'll do here. We'll just kind of keep this class going as much as we can. And let's see, any other questions? Dopa says this. Yeah, so here. So, yeah, Claire's asking $6,000 for the advanced curriculum and it's at your own pace. Yes. And you get access to all that stuff for as long as you need it, okay? And then if you want to join clinical rounds, you want to get back on the weekly live calls, there's an extra monthly fee for that. And it's optional. You can either do this advanced curriculum with or without the calls. I don't know. Depends on if you want the extra support or not, really. You guys can leave that up to you guys. So we separate them out price-wise. You probably also want to buy Richard's book on top of that too, okay? Let's see. I think, well, one more question here. If neurotransmitter beta oxidation problem. If neurotransmitter and beta oxidation problems, I always go after the brain problems first. I don't know why. All those years with Marty. In fact, for the years with Marty, I had a lot of patients, all we did was neurotransmitter programs. I mean, that was all he tested was neurotransmitters. So I had thousands of patients during those years where all I did was neurotransmitter testing on them. And it's pretty profound what happens when you change someone's brain, okay? All right, so we're going to wrap it up for now, but you can rejoin us on March 16th. I'm sure we'll be sending you out some emails to confirm all that. And I look forward to talking to you guys. And thank you all for showing up. This is great. I'm pretty excited to see so many people interested in this work still. All right, take care, everyone. Have a good night.